Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. Super wild card weekend. 6 massive football games to get to. As always, Bet the Board podcast, part of the Wondery Podcast Network. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, I got to ask, we always love more NFL football, but are you a fan of Super Wildcard Weekend, or are you more of a traditionalist that preferred the 4-game layout that we've grown accustomed to over the years?
I'd prefer you not calling it Super Wildcard Weekend, and we just went back to Wildcard Weekend like normal humans, but here we are.
This is what they call it. So I'm trying to help with the NFL with their marketing because they add 2 extra games. They decide to put a superlative on the front of it, and it's super. Thanks for asking. So we're good to go and willing to roll forward with all of that.
And then the money train, baby. Can't have the games Saturday and Sunday. Got to have that Monday Night Football primetime.
You have to add that to the mix. They want you to be able to run your errands early Saturday during the day before you park yourself in front of the TV for a football marathon of sorts over the course of those days. Before we get into the games themselves, real quick, I mean, Week 18 always a little bit unusual. Just wanted to get your take on the regular season in a quick, 15, 20-second synopsis in terms of the way things went this year compared to what you might have necessarily anticipated.
It was a good season. I don't understand the question.
No, I mean, I meant just the way the NFL went with some of the quarterback changes that we've seen, and we'll obviously get to it when you talk about the disparity between the AFC and NFC. I mean, the NFC, first time a conference has had 0 or 1 former first-round pick starting a quarterback in a postseason since 2007, and you talked about it in our preseason previews. It was like the varsity on one side of the draw and the JV on the other.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're looking at what the AFC is going to be. I mean, this is an absolute battle here with all of these young quarterbacks trending in the right direction and have teams that are wildly efficient and pushing for championships, and it's completely lopsided. And I think that's why, not to get into that touchy situation, you see the Bengals absolutely pissed off for doing the Lord's work and being extremely kind to the Buffalo Bills, and then all of a sudden getting screwed in the process, and they didn't like it very much. So they go out and score a touchdown, and they flip a coin and kick it into the stands, and that lets you know how they feel about that situation. But, San Francisco's lining up right now as the best team in the NFC. That's something that we anticipated being the case. Just didn't anticipate it with Brock Purdy under center. The AFC is a gauntlet right now. And I think even, we talked off air a little bit, if you were making a case for one team relative to price to make a little run, it's certainly the Chargers, and that's a team that everyone seems to be forgetting about a little bit. Now, they have some deficiencies and some coaching issues, but in terms of talent and the pieces and the price, that's an interesting candidate because everyone's just sitting here talking about 3 teams in the Chiefs, Bills, and Bengals. In terms of like the actual season, there was, I guess, the glaring difference here, and I'll just be completely open and candid. I didn't know where you were going with that question, but more high level, the difference for us this year was the viewpoint from the onset was correct, and the AFC would be low and the NFC would be similar to the Eastern Conference NBA years ago, where it was only LeBron in the East. And that was accurate. But the one thing that we had going for us the last 2 years was our overarching sentiment coming into the season that nobody knew about. We were bang on, and it allowed us to have some real early success in the total market. In 2020, the COVID year, we fully anticipated offenses humming out of the gate. And we got that because road teams were not going to have issues without the crowd noise. And it led to very high scoring. I mean, we started week 1 with an average total of about 45.5, and by week 5 we were We're at 51.5, and we profited handsomely on that. And then you look at 2021, that had all of the quirky metrics involved, and that's how books were opening lines, and we became an under party last year, and that went swimmingly. This year, there wasn't any massive discrepancy that we were going to be way ahead of the market on. There's also been weirdness to this NFL season, and I think, unfortunately, our loyal listeners have absorbed the brunt of that a little bit more than we have behind the scenes, because it's been one of the weirdest NFL seasons that we've seen, and there really hasn't been, even the best teams haven't played at peak, so the gap has been much smaller, I think, between some of these teams. The horrific teams that we envisioned were slightly below average. Even the best teams as we head into the playoffs, Todd, you can kind of poke holes at all of them, whether it's the Bengals O-line, whether it's the Bills not playing the best of football. The Chiefs still don't have that explosive nature to them. They're still starting a backup guard at right tackle. There's, been some issues defensively there. So you could poke holes at even the best teams, and the gap hasn't been as wide as we initially expected there, and it's created some wonkiness. The totals have been a little bit wonky with how teams are playing more too high shell, and scoring hasn't been as high. So there's been some weirdness there. It's unfolded, especially since week 8 for us, really, really well. But I guess I didn't know if you were asking me something basic or you were wanting me to divulge.
No. It's more just
some higher level stuff. So there we are.
No, it was more pretty much an open-ended question, just to kind of get your brief overview on what we saw unfold, because we know playoff football plays to a very different nature and tenor. So oftentimes any lessons that you learn during the regular season can only be applied as far as postseason ramifications in a limited capacity. So I think you ace that particular test, and it sets up quite nicely for us to get into the 6 games that we're breaking down here. And when you look at it,
the professor never liked when I answered a question with a question, so I appreciate you.
Fortunately for you, this isn't necessarily an academic environment, and while I oftentimes serves as host, I am more the pupil learning from you, breaking down these games as much as anything else. So when I ask these questions, it's for my own knowledge base, so I can apply it going forward. But when you look at
sometimes it's the TV Todd asking the question. I thought that's where
I was not looking for hot takes.
Got it into
I'm not looking for hot takes
level.
around here. I'm not looking to try and fire you up in any capacity. I mean, I know how to push your buttons when I need to, and I choose not to do that most of the time when we record these shows. But when you look at the way the wildcard weekend sets up, according to the Elias Sports Bureau, this year's wildcard round will feature all rematches from the regular season. It's actually the 5th time since the 1970 merger that every game in the opening round of the playoffs is a rematch from the regular season. First time we've seen this unfold since 2009. And not only do we have some rematches, we have some teams looking for a rubber match against one another, and division rivals doing battle with heightened stakes, to say the least. And Saturday afternoon, that's exactly where it takes us to Santa Clara, where it's the 49ers, nearly a double-digit favorite. This number down a touch from where it opened as their 9.5-point chalk. Total on the game, 42.5, matched up against the upstart Seattle Seahawks. This will be the second playoff meeting between these teams. Seattle won at home back in 2013 in the NFC Championship game, 23-17. The 49ers swept the Seahawks in the regular season, outscoring them 48-20, the first time that they actually swept their division rival since 2011. And the Seahawks, well, they're the only team that's faced the 49ers with all 3 quarterbacks that they've used under center. So interesting when you factor some of that component in. And credit the Seahawks. They had the 4th longest odds to make the postseason before the year started, widely available in that 6 to 7 to 1 range. So Pete Carroll, with a very young roster, parting ways with Russell Wilson, was able to accomplish things that I don't think most of us anticipated being capable. Now, when you look at the Seahawks and I talk about their youth, I mean, rookies started 70 games this season, tied for the most by any playoff team since 1970 with the 2018 Colts. You look at the offensive line, you look at the defense, you look at Geno Smith on the resurrection path. Fascinating storylines. They needed a little bit of help to even make this happen. But Payne, they ran into the buzzsaw, and you talked about the 49ers being the best team in the NFC. If you're looking at the Seahawks, are you interested to see what they can do different offensively here that they haven't been able to do in the first 2 meetings matching up against DeMeco Ryans' defense?
That's what's so interesting about this slate of games is every single game is a rematch, and in some cases, the third time. And that's what we have here. I think, maybe getting up to speed with the number here. I mean, at 10.5 and even 10, some money came in on Seattle. And it's, to me, nothing more than the idea of the price being off. And you can kind of play that game sometimes, Todd, where, back in week 15, the 49ers were laying like 3.2 in Seattle. So it's tough to get to 10.5 a month later. There's a low total. There was some potential weather in play. And Seattle at this point is playing with house money, very much a free roll for them. To your point, they were playing with zero expectation this season. And for the 49ers, that's kind of when the pressure ramps up, because it's a vibe where it's Super Bowl or bust. And after making some of those trades and winning 10 straight to end the season, there's only one goal here. I think when you look at this now and have the conversation of the spread being 9.5, the price is always the most important in the equation, but 1B, especially in the playoffs, is the matchup. And this is just a horrific matchup for Seattle. There's multiple things here that just don't bode well for the Seahawks, especially on offense. And I think we've talked about them a couple times this season. I know we broke down the first game because it was Thursday Night Football. But the Seahawks have just been horrific offensively anytime they step up in class. And so when you factor in health, efficiency, motivation at the time of the matchup, there's 5 games that really stand out for Seattle's offense. Denver week 1, the 2 previous 49ers games, Tampa in Germany, and then the Jets late in the year. Those are the clear-cut best defenses at the time Seattle played them. And when I look at early downs, the first 3 quarters in those 5 matchups, Seattle weeks 1 and 2 against Denver and the 49ers back-to-back weeks, 30th in EPA per play, negative 0.18 EPA per play. Week 10, that was the Tampa game in Germany, negative 0.02 EPA per play. Week 15 against the 49ers, negative 0.39 EPA per play. Worst performance of any offense that week. I would say week 17 against the Jets, top 5 defense, both teams playing for everything. Jets had extra rest and prep, having come off the Thursday night game against Jacksonville. That was arguably one of Seattle's better offensive performances this season. But if you look at the Seahawks trending metrics offensively, even with that Jets performance included, which is going to weight pretty well, they've been horrific. I mean, on early downs, the first 3 quarters since week 10, Seattle's 28th in EPA per play. Geno Smith's play has tailed off substantially. First 9 weeks, he was QB 4 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. Since then, QB 19. And I think the other part of the offensive struggles for Seattle is pretty clear. It's up front. It's their inability to run the ball. Offensive line is getting 0 push, 30th in adjusted line yards created, 24th in run block win rate. Kenneth Walker, he's just very much boom or bust. He can be wildly explosive, but he is extremely inconsistent. Outside the top 40 in qualifying running backs in success rate and runs stopped at or behind the line of scrimmage, it's either a 10, 12, 15-yard run, but there's 3 or 4 negative runs to follow it up. It's very, I don't know whether he's just not hitting the hole, the vision isn't good, whatever it is, but you look at the 49ers defense, elite against the run, second in schedule adjusted rush efficiency. Their D-line is healthy. So basically what this becomes is a one-dimensional Seattle offense with Geno throwing against the 49ers pass rush, which is a pass rush that gets pressure at the 6th highest rate while blitzing at a below average rate. The one advantage Seattle's offense could have is pushing the ball deep down the field. That's where the 49ers are most vulnerable. They're 7th worst in EPA per dropback on throws of 20-plus yards. But if Geno doesn't have time and the wind gusts and rain that were expected a little bit heavier earlier in the week start to come back, it's tough to take advantage in the one area where you have an edge. You also look at Seattle in this type of environment where they're playing outdoors, on the road, on grass this season. There's only 3 data points. 33 total points in those 3 games, Todd.
Well, you mentioned, being pressured, and the numbers obviously belay that point. When you talk about Geno, his average pass distance, 3.4 yards shorter downfield versus the 49ers this season compared with all others, and obviously as a result, the yards per attempt drop off a cliff, 5.9 versus San Francisco versus everyone else, 7.7. So while it's great to have the full body of work, and those folks out there will love to go sample size, every now and again when you play the same defense and the same issues continue to manifest themselves, you begin to get a little bit concerned. concern. You talked about the 49ers' vulnerability to some of the deep balls. It'll be interesting to see exactly if Seattle's able to get the ball downfield to a couple of their playmakers and try and create a little bit of balance there. Now, of course...
Where can't you pass, by the way, on the 49ers? Like, they are the very best defending short throws. Yeah, I mean, so it's like if you're trying to run it, if you're trying to throw short because you're, worried about the pass rush, you just throw it right to where they want you to. And this has been one of the worst matchups in the entire league, the Seahawks offense versus the 49ers defense.
Now, obviously, you mentioned it for the 49ers. They're going to measure the merits of this season based on Super Bowl or bust. They're seeking their first Super Bowl title since they beat the Chargers way back in 1994. The 10-game win streak is the longest since 97, and they're the first team with consecutive 5-game winning streaks by different quarterbacks since the 1972 Miami Dolphins were able to accomplish that feat. Brock Purdy, of course, is the X factor, and there's no way to kind of sugarcoat it. The only rookie quarterback drafted in the 7th round or later to start a playoff game since 1950. Only rookie quarterback drafted lower than 164th overall to start a playoff game since 1950. But you look at how this offense has performed down the stretch since he took over. They lead the NFL in scoring offense. He leads the NFL in passing touchdowns, yards per attempt, and passer rating. We've seen George Kittle off the milk carton into the end zone 7 times with Brock Purdy under center. When you look at Seattle, we know that this defense obviously extremely vulnerable against the run. The Hawks will have an increased level of familiarity. They saw Brock Purdy in a game that you mentioned that they lost at home 21-13. But if you're Seattle and you're trying to scheme up things to slow down a quarterback that hasn't performed on this kind of stage, do the Seahawks have a path to staying competitive on the defensive side of the ball?
Got to hope and pray a little bit. I mean, we know the first-time quarterback trends in the playoffs. They're not very good. And so everyone just associates that with Brock Purdy. But this will also be Geno Smith's first playoff start. To me, this is very straightforward on this side of the ball. You look at Seattle, they've gotten a respite the last 2 games going up against Mike White with broken ribs and the Jets offense who just fired their OC, the Rams with Baker Mayfield, and an offensive-minded head coach that is rumored to have one foot out the door. So that's what you've faced the last 2 weeks, and then it took some help with the Lions doing your dirty work to get it to this spot. But you look at the last 2 data points, even with those included, the Seahawks are 26th in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency since Week 10. They are who we thought they were, right? Their green dot, Jordan Brooks, went down recently with an injury as well. And so that little 4 or 5 game sample where we thought in the middle of the season where Seattle's defense was starting to surge a little bit is very much a byproduct of some weather and some lackluster offenses they were facing. The defense just isn't that good. And then you look at all the things that San Francisco does extremely well on offense. It's the Achilles heel of the Seattle defense. Seahawks are 28th against the run since Week 10. 49ers offensively, 2nd in EPA per rush over that stretch. You got CMC running well now that he's fully healthy. You just got Mitchell back last week. It looks like he's been shot out of a cannon because he's been working his way back, but he's kind of healthy there. So that's a nice 1-2 punch now. Seattle can't cover tight ends or running backs. That was the focal point of our breakdown the last time these 2 teams played. The Seahawks are giving up over 14 yards per reception to tight ends. Seattle's 31st in yards per target allowed to the tight end position. They also give up more than 8.5 yards per reception to running backs as well. And we just know Kyle Shanahan likes to sprinkle those kind of players into the system, into his offensive attack. I think we'll hear again all week about, quarterbacks struggling in their first playoff start. The sample size is certainly, large enough and the data is conclusive enough to suggest that it's a thing. So we'll see the game plan for Brock Purdy. But if you just kind of know Kyle Shanahan's mentality and his makeup, it's very much, we're just running my offense. I don't really care who's running it. So I don't think Brock Purdy is going to be babied any more than he would have been in any other game. What's interesting, though, about Brock Purdy is he's been almost unstoppable against defenses that don't blitz him. He's completing nearly 73% of his passes when he's not blitzed. And you look at his adjusted yards per pass attempt, 9.6 yards. The Seahawks don't blitz. Seattle didn't blitz him the first time. They play with the 2nd lowest blitz rate, full season metrics. It's not really the way you want to attack that kind of quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see. You would think Brock Purdy's going to be pretty comfortable there. And then the other thing here is the last time they played, he didn't have Deebo Samuel. So for me, Todd, like, I don't want Seattle at the second number below the key. So if I'm betting a side in this game, it's trying to figure out how to get the 49ers in an advantage teaser at this point, with it being down to 9.5.
No, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, when you look at it, we always talk price is the ultimate determinant. And so the prospect of taking 10 and even 10.5 in some cases, obviously attractive for a lot of pro bettors with such a low total when you do the quick math, trying to figure out where Seattle would have to get to put yourself in a very good spot. The one thing to keep in mind, if the number does get up into that double-digit range, we have not seen double-digit underdogs fare all that well. It doesn't happen a ton during the wild card round. 1-10 straight up, just 3-8 against the spread. The only straight up win coming by the 2019 Titans against the Ravens. So you do see a separation of the haves and have-nots, but I think the one point that you made that a lot of people look at waiting for Brock Purdy to turn into the de facto pumpkin, Geno Smith, despite his laundry list of NFL experience, being in and out of meetings, locker rooms, etc., has never been asked to perform on a stage this large. Clearly no target on his back. Go out there and play loose and free. We'll see if it's enough for Cinderella to keep this party going into the divisional round. You mentioned...
You're having negative thoughts about some Purdy performances in the Big 12 championship game, I feel like.
Well, I mean, this was a guy that we were so bullish on, and I felt like he let us down during the latter portions of his time in Ames, and I wasn't sure if I should point the finger at him, given the love affair we had with Matt Campbell, but watching Hunter Decker all season long, I think Matt Campbell may have a lot more to do with it than the actual quarterback himself.
I think you're probably right there. There's no doubt about that.
We have questions about the quarterbacks in the early game. I don't think there are a ton of questions about the quarterbacks that'll be playing in the late game. When you look at the face of the NFL going forward as far as the AFC, there's clearly a separation after the Josh Allens, the Patrick Mahomes, and Joe Burrows and what they've accomplished. Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert would like to mention themselves in that same pantheon. And you've seen the Chargers leak out a little bit throughout the course of the week. They're now out to a 2.5-point road favorite. Total in the game, 47.5. We did see some shops open up here. Number get as low as a pick. Not a whole lot of movement as far as the total was concerned. And Saturday night has the potential to be the coldest home game in Jacksonville Jaguars history. When you look at the weather forecast, highs for the day in the 40s, lows into the 30s. So Payne, we know that space heaters will be out in full force at tailgates, and there'll be a mass trip to all the outdoor shops for those North Floridians to make sure that they can protect themselves from the elements. These teams played back in week 3, but the game obviously meant a whole heck of a lot less, and you were talking about Justin Herbert operating at about a 30% capacity. As far as the quarterback matchups concerned, both top 10 picks are making their playoff debuts. Both are the youngest quarterback to start playoff games in their team's history. Both finished this year with 25 passing touchdowns, and it's the fourth playoff quarterback matchup since 1950 between first-round picks, both under age of 25. So it just talks about the passing of the baton that we've seen. Meanwhile, the Jaguars will make their second playoff appearance in the last 15 seasons. The Chargers back in the postseason for the first time since 2018. Payne, we haven't seen this number move through any keys. Is it worth noting that you've seen so much back and forth between Pick'em and -2.5?
So this is the interesting game in that we are higher, generally speaking, not this week, generally speaking, on Jacksonville than others. So we made a pick, which is kind of where this settled, and then we've seen some Chargers money enter the market yesterday and then again this morning before we started recording. So we're at like Chargers -2.6 here, and we're not quite sure of Mike Williams' status. They're calling it back spasms, has not practiced twice this week. In terms of like, this is the one wild card rematch where I'm not sure you can really glean much from the first meeting, to your point, where Justin Herbert was probably 30, 40, 50%. It was his first game playing with that rib cartilage tear. It was game 3 of Trevor Lawrence and the rest of the Jags offensive players learning a new Doug Pederson offense. And if you're familiar with that situation, Doug Pederson's openly said multiple times over the years, the beginning of the season when he's trying new things, he's implementing, he's figuring out what he has, what best suits his players. I mean, Travis Etienne wasn't even the bell cow at that point. The guy that was isn't even on the roster anymore. And so in terms of movement, I was a little surprised where the total opened. If you do go back to that week 3 game, the look-ahead total was 50.5. Then Justin Herbert got injured the prior week against Kansas City. Market reopened 48.5, did close substantially lower. But knowing all that, it doesn't shock me the first move came over here. We saw one shop open as low as 45.5. The consensus open was 46.5. We're now through that key of 47, a full point higher to 47.5. So that was, I think, interesting in terms of market line movement and kind of where we're at as we break this game down now.
When we look at this Chargers offense, you mentioned Mike Williams, and obviously everyone will be paying close attention to his availability, knowing how much more prolific the offense looks when he's out there alongside Keenan Allen. The Chargers did open the practice window on Rashawn Slater. We know he's not going to be out there, but obviously a light at the end of the tunnel should the Chargers be able to win this weekend and advance to a higher stakes game next weekend. The big thing, and we've bemoaned this forever, you pointed it out, that the Chargers have an absence of big plays in this offense. 27th in explosive plays so far this season. Justin Herbert, the third shortest average pass length in the NFL, pressured at the 9th highest rate, and the 5th fewest giveaway. So there are some conflicting metrics when you try and look there. And then when you try and dig into how this Chargers offense performs, obviously significantly better when the two most dynamic pass catchers are out there. A passer rating for Justin Herbert of 106.4 with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams on the field. That number dips to 89 when one of them is off the field, along with yards per attempt that falls from 7.9 to 6.4. Austin Eckler, as dynamic a running back, both running the football and catching the ball out of the backfield as you're going to find. And when you look at Jacksonville, Payne, all the talk has been about their massive defensive improvements, but there's a little bit of noise in some of those numbers when you look at the recent run of quarterbacks that the Jags have played in their final 3 games of the regular season.
Very much the same conversation as last week. We're thinking with the same brain. I'm just not a believer in Jacksonville's defense. I am not willing to be bamboozled into thinking that there's been drastic improvement because you played Zach Wilson on a short week in weather and the Texans offense or Dobbs and the Titans offense, who, by the way,
better than we thought,
was only forced to punt once the first 3 quarters last week. And you put that in the context of Tennessee, a run-first team, was held to a 25% rushing success rate. It's even wilder. The Titans punted once in the first 3 stanzas last week. The Chargers are just a completely different animal, right? They want to throw it. To your point, there's been frustration because of Joe Lombardi. We identified that issue halfway through game 1 last season, but I don't know if it's a problem here. I mean, Jacksonville's defense against passes thrown less than 7 air yards, 29th in success rate, 24th in EPA per pass allowed. So the short stuff should work and be efficient against Jacksonville. It should create some yak situations where Jacksonville's been horrific tackling. They've graded out the 30th best tackling team. You also have to think about what Jacksonville's faced in general this season. Look at the division they play in. And it's basically yielded a schedule of the worst offenses in the NFL that they've faced. Dead last, 32nd toughest schedule of offenses. I think also going back to some of these short passes, the beneficiary could be Keenan Allen. He's 100% healthy since week 11. Keenan's been targeted at the 2nd highest rate among all receivers. He runs nearly 65% of his routes from the slot, and the Jaguars' defense is bottom 3rd of the league defending passes to slot receptions. When you look at slot receptions per game, yards per target, and touchdown rate surrendered to the slot, all bottom 3rd of the league. So there's a decent matchup there. You look at Jacksonville, they're also poor defending tight ends and running backs through the air, giving up more than 13 yards per target to tight ends. Jacksonville's also allowed the 2nd most receptions and yards to running backs in the pass game. So cue up Austin Eckler, most likely. And then when you think about the Chargers hunting the big play, and they do it from time to time, whether it's Palmer, whether it's Mike Williams. Again, hopefully he's healthy. Did miss practice both days with this back injury. They hunt these big plays typically off play action. If Lombardi is smart, he's going to up the rate of play action that Justin Herbert throws with here. Jacksonville is extremely sensitive to play action. If you look on play action passes, the first 3 quarters on early downs, Jacksonville's defense 26th in EPA per play allowed, 3rd worst since week 10. There's a real path to points for the Chargers here based upon the matchup. Jacksonville stepping up in class from what they've played all season and specifically the last 3 games. And so it doesn't shock me that we're seeing Chargers money enter the market here.
No, on the other side of the ball, obviously Trevor Lawrence didn't put the best game we ever anticipated on tape last weekend against the Tennessee Titans. It was the defense making the biggest play for the Jags to win them the AFC South title. But when you look at the Chargers, they didn't actually play all that much better on the defensive side of the ball, allowing the corpse of Russell Wilson to play chuck and duck for the better part of 3.5 quarters. I know that, of course, comes with an asterisk. You wonder about the level of focus and everything else that you want to attribute there. But the Titans, to their credit, did a great job of making Jacksonville one-dimensional. They bottled up Travis Etienne yet again, and it put the burden of proof on Lawrence. Now that monkey of playing his first de facto playoff game potentially off his back, when you look at the Jaguars offense matched up against the Chargers defense, is it as straightforward as committing to the ground game, forcing the Chargers to play their safeties a little bit closer to the line and looking to take advantage over the top? Or is there another path to success that the Jags can have moving the football with a lot of dynamic playmakers in space?
Yeah, I think this is probably the part of the game that has the largest variance because Brandon Staley has the ability to watch film and devise a game plan that hasn't necessarily been employed last week or on the season. So you have that potential unknown there. But to me, what's interesting is the Chargers defense has been trending up since week 12. They're actually top 5 in EPA per play allowed, slightly above average in schedule adjusted efficiency over that stretch. But boy, I know they're getting healthier, but the offenses the Chargers have faced are dreadful. Number 32 Colts, number 30 Cardinals, number 29 Broncos, to your point, number 21 Titans with Malik Willis for a stretch and Tannehill coming back with an injury that ended up finishing his season. Number 23 Rams, a below-average Raiders offense, and a massively downtrending Dolphins offense. So it's tough to take a ton from the Chargers' defensive improvement. Jacksonville's offense also hasn't been pushed in recent weeks. I know they needed some points last week, but when you just think about the style of game, they faced 3 straight under teams, 4 under teams in the last 5 weeks. And so if they're being pushed, I think things look a little bit better offensively for them. Jacksonville has the extra day of prep. They have the extra day without travel. The Chargers defense just played its starters for some unknown reason in altitude.
Morons.
And so I think there's going to be
absolutely ridiculous. I get you can get hurt week 1 the same way you can get hurt week 18, but come on, Chargers, let's go.
Especially when there was nowhere to go.
Yeah,
You're 5.
Exactly. You're
no matter
stuck.
what, win, loss, or draw. Yeah. So I think there's going to be more opportunities for Jacksonville offensively than what the trending metrics for the Chargers defense would kind of indicate here. The Jags offense, and specifically Trevor Lawrence, have been playing quite well, and it started right before the bye. You look from week 9 onward, Doug Pederson is pushing all the buttons for the 7th most efficient offense. And over that same stretch, Trevor Lawrence is QB number 5 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. I know he had the errant throw to Zay Jones in the back of the end zone that, you can make in the backyard.
I don't know. You've never seen my arm. I got about a 6-yard out pattern, and that's the extent of the passes that I'm completing anytime soon.
You and potentially Teddy Bridgewater on the same path this week.
But I got 5 working digits on my hand, Payne. He doesn't have 5.
So, past some surface level elements, there's interesting matchups here as well. Again, I would think Brandon Staley changes the formula and comes up with something specific for Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence. But during this recent run of defensive success, the Chargers are blitzing like madmen. Right, since week 14, early downs, first 3 quarters, Chargers are blitzing at the highest rate in the league, but they're below average getting pressure. 3rd down is the only down the Chargers are getting decent pressure. Khalil Mack's been very poor since week 12, starting to look a little old. Bosa returning certainly helps, and Cam Robinson, the starting tackle, being out for Jacksonville hurts. But where Trevor Lawrence has really excelled is when defenses blitz but don't get home on early downs. When Lawrence is not pressured on those early down situations, he's 3rd in EPA. There's going to be some opportunities, I think, for Jacksonville's offense to take advantage of a blitzing Chargers defense that has not gotten home a ton on early downs. Trevor Lawrence is top 5 in success rate against the blitz. again, that's the dynamic where there's variance. Is Brandon Staley going to say, hey, we've seen a ton of defensive improvement recently because we're sending a bunch of heat? Or is he going to say, hey, I'm going to take a blueprint out of the Texans playbook back in week 4, was it, and just live in too high shell and force them to go 5, 6, 7 yards a clip? We'll see. Certainly Derwin James can be the eraser of Ingram at tight end. There's some interesting pieces here that the Chargers have to be able to deploy. But even with like some of those improvements defensively, you can still run on the Chargers. And what blew me away is how drastic the Chargers' defensive performances have been based on some of the competition they faced. Obviously, right, the better offense you play, the worse you should perform. But we assign expectation to performance based on who you play. And if you look at the Chargers, when they've played an average to above average offense this season, and Jacksonville, again, is 9th and trending better, those offenses average 5.9 yards to go on third down against the Chargers defense. League average is 7 yards to go on third down. 5.9 yards to go is the equivalent of the worst mark in the league. When the Chargers play a below average offense, those teams face 7.7 yards to go on third down and be the equivalent of the second best mark in the league. So, yes, you have to adjust for schedule, but they've just been, the dichotomy is the size of the ocean here. So that's pretty interesting to me when I uncovered that. So unless the pressure for the Chargers gets home and Trevor Lawrence doesn't play to his pressure metrics, I think the Jags are going to be in some manageable third down situations, and that's where Trevor Lawrence has been damn good too. Top 10 QB on that down in a slew of metrics. You would think NTN has some success here on the ground as well. So I don't think the Chargers defense is going to be as good as what we've seen in recent weeks here, Todd. That's kind of what I've uncovered.
And
here.
credit Trevor Lawrence. I mean, this is a quarterback we were critical of earlier in the year in the good, bad, and the ugly, and maybe it took a full season under Doug Pederson's tutelage for him to unlock some of the skill set that made him that generational talent when he was the number 1 pick overall. And you look at some of his numbers. I mean, largest increase in passer rating by number 1 pick from year 1 to year 2 since Terry Bradshaw accomplished the feat back in 1970 to 71. His release time has improved. And again, we saw him almost, I don't like to say the word, but almost look tight on the stage last week. This week, he can play loose and free. He's got that de facto playoff win under his belt. And he was open and honest with his assessment of his performance, saying that he missed some throws that he's got to make, and he's got to be better if the Jaguars are going to be a difficult out. So we'll see 2 quarterbacks matching wits come Saturday night. And what I think, personally, is the most fascinating game of Wild Card Weekend.
Well, let me ask you this, and I know we're spending a lot of time on the first 2 games, but there's some games here where we won't dive nearly as deep into. The sentiment where we were basically throwing baby out with the bathwater, a.k.a. Trevor Lawrence, his rookie years with Urban Meyer. I mean, that was an abject disaster. And even us didn't really, I knew it, but didn't put it together. He's learning a brand new offense under Doug Pederson. We know Doug Pederson tinkers with things early in the season. It really feels like now we're starting to see what Trevor Lawrence could be, and I understand he's not quite yet nipping at the heels of the other young quarterbacks in this league, like a Herbert or Mahomes, Burrow, Josh Allen, but I do think if you continue on this path and you show well here and you build some more momentum in the offseason, you get acclimated to that system a little bit better, and Doug Pederson now fully knows what he has and can create better things specific for Trevor Lawrence, I think the narrative is going to change drastically here for Trevor Lawrence.
Well, the other thing that's going to help him immensely, Payne, and I mean, I haven't gone through and set some of my numbers for odds to win divisions next year. The Jaguars could be the heaviest favorite in almost any division in football, given how dire the quarterback situation is throughout the rest of the other teams, with the Indianapolis Colts going to rebuild. The Tennessee Titans, not sure what they're going to do at the quarterback position. And, of course, the Houston Texans, will they trade up for the number 1 spot, given what Lovie Smith decided to accomplish as a big fuck you walking out the door to Houston, relegating with that number 2 pick. So things are set up quite nicely for the Jags. Shad Khan, who we said kind of felt like a drunken sailor on a spending spree. It's obviously paid dividends as far as the offense. When you look at the 4 players that have had the biggest impact there, not named Trevor Lawrence: Christian Kirk, member of Arizona; Zay Jones, a member of the Raiders; Evan Ingram, a member of the Giants; and Travis Etienne missed the whole season with that Liz Frank injury. So the future's bright in Jacksonville, regardless of how things unfold on Saturday night. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And if you haven't already done so, encourage you guys to sign up for the Bet the Board newsletter. All sorts of great information in there, updates, reminders about all of the great content we're producing around here, fresh episodes of Cardboard Chat, the NFL podcast, down to 1 a week until we hand out the Lombardi Trophy, and waiting in the wings, the resurrection of the NASCAR season with Daytona a little bit more than a month away. Payne, you mentioned games that we're not going to spend a ton of time on versus deep dives. I feel this is the poster child for what's going to transpire in Western New York, where Buffalo is nearly a 2-touchdown favorite as they'll welcome in their division rival in the Miami Dolphins. Buffalo right around 13, we'll call it. Total on the game, 43.5. The first playoff meeting between these division rivals since 1998, where Dan Marino went head-to-head with Doug Flutie. The home team won both meetings this season, each decided by 3 points or fewer, obviously with the caveat played in very different temperatures with very different personnel out there. The Dolphins, they've lost 9 straight outdoor games below 40 degrees. It's actually the longest active streak in the NFL. 7 of those 9 losses during the streak have come by 16-plus points. But Payne, I got to ask you, this number has been entertaining as hell to watch the line movement. It's up, it's down, it's one way, it's another. We saw the Dolphins get all the way down to a 9.5 point dog with a total up to 46.5. I have to think there was speculation somewhere that Tua was going to get cleared and that he was going to be under center before obviously Wednesday morning we found out. Au contraire, not the case whatsoever.
Information is key. But when it's the wrong information, that can be detrimental. And so wrong information is actually worse than no information at all. And that's ultimately what we saw unfold with the back and forth in the Tua situation. There was nothing, to my knowledge, I'm pretty tuned in down here, that would indicate that Tua was going to play in this game. I think what's interesting here, and we'll just kind of go through this and I'll talk and you can give some final thoughts and then we'll move on. This game becomes one of the larger liabilities for sports books because even at this price, I don't think pro bettors are going to bail them out. The Dolphins health-wise are just in shambles. I mean, we know Tua's out, okay? The options are Skylar Thompson with a sprained MCL or Teddy Bridgewater with a dislocated pinky finger on his throwing hand that, as of Wednesday, only allows him to throw the ball about 6 yards downfield. Maybe Teddy becomes more serviceable by the time Sunday rolls around, but as of today, Miami's preparing Skylar Thompson to start. And Skylar Thompson is a rookie 7th-round draft pick. Miami's offense averages 2.2 yards less per play with Skylar than when Tua is under center. And if you look at quarterbacks with at least 100 dropbacks this season, Skylar Thompson is quarterback 47 out of 52 qualifiers. He basically shares the cellar with quarterbacks like Malik Willis, Zach Wilson, Baker Mayfield, P.J. Walker, and Trace McSorley. And we talk all the time about how it's vital to be efficient on early downs and bypass third downs. The Dolphins face third downs at an 11% higher rate with Skylar Thompson under center than with Tua. And in any game Tua started, Miami's third in schedule-adjusted offensive efficiency. In any game Tua hasn't played, well below league average. And it's not just the quarterback situation. Starting left tackle, Teron Armstead is dealing with a torn pec, a toe injury, a knee injury, and hip injuries. Hasn't played in multiple weeks, was a DNP on Wednesday. Claims he's going to do anything he can to play. We'll see. The Dolphins' backup left tackle, Kendall Lamb, left the Patriots game in Week 17 with an ankle injury after 32 snaps. Did not play against the Jets. Was a DNP on Wednesday. Monitor that situation. New starting right tackle, Brandon Shell, left the Jets game early with a knee injury and ankle injury. He only became the starter once the actual starter, Austin Jackson, was injured this season. Starting left guard, Liam Eichenberg, left the Jets game late with a hand injury, did not practice Wednesday. Monitor that. So the Dolphins' O-line is in shambles here. Tyreek Hill is battling an ankle injury. For some reason, he's not on the injury report. I commend that move, but he is not.
Yeah, that's a page out of the Sean
around.
McVay playbook. According to Sean McVay, Todd Gurley's knee was never an issue during that Rams run to the Super Bowl.
Todd Gurley right now woke up and his knee is elevated with ice on it as we record.
So is mine, so I can't be
Tyreek
critical
Hill
of that kind of thing. I just never took NFL snaps.
Basically hobbled around all of the Jets games. Cedric Wilson is dealing with a hip and groin issue. Missed last week. Questionable this week. Starting running back Raheem Mostert just had surgery on his thumb. Apparently he's going to try and play with a big cast, which means he's not going to be a factor in the pass game and he can only hold the ball in one hand. This is not good going into a hostile environment with the Damar Hamlin situation no longer a distraction, but a motivating factor. And the Bills are going to have a full work week, unlike what they had last week. The Bills are going to be focused, knowing that Miami had a 29-20 lead just a few weeks back in Buffalo. And the difference this week, if it's Skylar Thompson compared to last week, you can't hide Skylar this week, right? You could hide him last week because the game script and game situation allowed it because you're playing a putrid Jets offense. But Buffalo's going to score here, so you can't hide him. He's going to be dropping back to pass with a lackluster offensive line, and that situation could cause a snowball effect. And if you look at the Dolphins defensively, their efficiency trails off substantially on the road. Last 3 seasons, Miami's a top 10 defense at home in every predictive per-play metric, bottom 5 on the highway. Bradley Chubb is dealing with the broken thumb and a wrist sprain, didn't practice Wednesday, would lean towards him trying to gut it out again, could only muster 17 snaps against the Jets last week. The only shot the Dolphins have of covering the current number is the defense plays to a level that it does at home and is able to get pressure and maybe even force Josh Allen to leave this game. Otherwise, trouble. And I get it. Buffalo metrically isn't playing to expectation. They beat the Patriots basically last week on 5 plays, much to our chagrin. 2 kickoff return touchdowns, 2 interceptions at the 1-yard line and in the red zone after a phantom hold on Hunter Henry put the Patriots in a long down and distance situation. And then on 3rd and 10+ around midfield instead of a punt, it's a Hail Mary shot to Diggs. Since week 9, the Bills aren't playing like the best team in football, not playing like the number 1 power-rated team. They're 4th in schedule-adjusted efficiency as a team since then for us. Total down-to-down EPA, the Bills are outside the top 5. So they're not playing their best. It was kind of that talk at the top where the best teams in the AFC right now, Buffalo, Bengals, Chiefs, you can kind of pick some holes out. But this is the first game where the goal of the Super Bowl or bust starts. Buffalo's pretty healthy. Miami's not. We have a Dolphins team in its current form with a below-average offense when Skylar is running it, and that's compounded with injuries, and a defense that's below average and dips even lower on the highway here. My instinct said if you started Skylar for every single game with the current injuries and the defense on the road, you're looking at a team that's going to play potentially like a 2-3-4 win team here.
That's ugly. I was going to actually ask you that question. You know, when you look at the way the Dolphins are currently constructed, obviously forget the fact that they're 9-8 and those prolific offensive performances, where you guys would have them rated. I think that's mind-boggling for me, so I can only imagine how the listeners will respond hearing how poorly the Dolphins get graded out when you're talking about a third-string quarterback, weapons that are dinged up, offensive linemen that are hurt, and a secondary that would struggle against some vertical passing attacks at the high school level the way that they're currently built.
Yeah, I mean, even those guys. I mean, Xavier Howard knew the situation last week, played extremely well. He's not 100% healthy. Javon Holland playing through some injuries. He's not 100% healthy. And so the Dolphins haven't had good success stopping the Bills anyways. And now you have some injuries to the secondary and guys that are dinged up. And so this is just not a good matchup here. And you kind of felt it last week. Sure, the Dolphins got... It was a bigger win for us.
Hell
right?
yeah,
Going over 8.5 wins. And then I think it was for the Dolphins, candidly. Now, perceptually, it was awesome for Mike McDaniel, get his team in the playoffs, get the Dolphins to the playoffs, kind of get the negative narrative out there that he could potentially be canned after one season, which would be the dumbest move in the history of the sport. But there was very much this vibe and sense where it's like, yay, we made the playoffs. There is zero expectation to do anything past that because internally they know how beat up they are.
I was just happy to hear Payne in the wake of the Jets parting ways with Mike LaFleur that one of their top candidates for the offensive coordinator position could be none other than Darrell Bevell. So, I mean, that was the real highlight coming out of that Jets-Dolphins game and everything that we saw unfold last Sunday.
If Mike McDaniel got fired, he would immediately be the Jets OC and would be causing terror on the Dolphins for the next couple of seasons.
You got to be careful how some of those pieces come together, but obviously a successful season for the Dolphins. They exceed Oddsmaker's expectations. You'd like to see them have more than a puncher's chance. Numbers suggest that this game could be over sooner rather than later. From early Sunday in Western New York into Minneapolis, where the Minnesota Vikings and the New York Giants will play for the second time in the short span of 4 weeks. Both teams enter this game, Payne, with negative point differential this season, the fourth ever playoff game with two teams doing battle that have a negative point differential, and it's the Vikings, a field goal favorite. Total in the game, anywhere from 48 on the low end, upwards of 48.5. We know about the Vikings' charmed existence so far this year, 11-0 in one-score games, most one-score wins in a season in NFL history. Also, a little bit of uncharted territory, only the fourth time that you're going to see rookie head coaches meeting in the postseason as well. And when you look at the first meeting, the Vikings slipped by the Giants 27-24. It was a Greg Joseph 61-yard field goal as time expired, actually the longest field goal in Vikings history, a game where the Vikings trailed 13-10 going into the fourth quarter. And that particular day, it was all about Justin Jefferson. 12 catches, 133 yards, and he shared the limelight with TJ Hawkinson. 13 catches for 109 yards. First meeting in the playoffs between these teams since the Giants beat the Vikings 41-0 in the 2000 NFC title game. It was actually a game I got yelled at. I was trying to listen in between periods when I was playing junior hockey in Burlington, Vermont back in the day. Giants' first playoff appearance since 2016, seeking their first playoff win since they beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Payne, this game, the last time we saw it, how much can we take from that particular matchup in terms of what we're going to see unfold with the stakes getting ratcheted up, but a lot of the personnel very similar to what we saw then with one major exception?
A lot. I mean, this is really a game that I can't wait to watch. And I think, when you look at the Giants this season, 3-0. ATS and rematches. Over the last couple years, you exclude Chiefs games because you have to do that. Daboll's 9-1 ATS and rematches his last 10, and it just depicts a great coach. He can envision the adjustments you're making based on the first game, and he's ready to have a counter to your counter. Okay? Now, we broke this game back down, I believe it was week 16. Is that right?
Yeah, week 16.
Is that when they first played?
Ice out in Minneapolis on that fine Saturday. I think. No, Sunday. I can't remember.
The Giants, as I indicated they would, had a picture-perfect game plan. But will that game plan catch the Vikings off guard this time? Or is the Vikings defense just that bad it won't matter? Because the Vikings did a good job stopping the run with a light box, but still couldn't stop the pass. And that is exactly what we would have advised for anybody that was playing the Vikings or are playing the Vikings. And the Giants are very good in this road dog role. Kind of talked about that before over the years, whether it was Eli Manning or what seems to be just a trend for some reason. Daniel Jones just has weirdly played better on the highway too. Passer rating for his career, 10% better. Adjusted net yards per pass attempt, 1.1 yards better on the road. Daniel Jones' touchdown-interception ratio is nearly 3-1 on the road, virtually 1.2-1 at home. So everything just seems to operate better offensively for the Giants on the road. Everything that's wrong with Minnesota's defense is what Daboll and Kafka will try to execute here. I mean, the Vikings are the most sensitive defense to play-action passes. Dead last in EPA per pass allowed to play-action passes. Daniel Jones throws a play-action a boatload. 35% of his dropbacks, he throws a play action. It's a top 5 rate among qualifying quarterbacks. The Giants will likely break tendency again where Daboll and Kafka throw on early downs. They'll throw on early downs with play action. They won't be as run heavy on second down. The Vikings, we know, are dead last defending early down passes. There's a reason if you look at Daniel Jones' pass chart in that first half and how he ended up with 42 pass attempts and over 330 yards. The game plan was perfect. Again, it probably won't catch Minnesota off guard, but based upon the way they defended the Giants with a light box and numerous guys back in coverage, you probably can beat them that way anyways, even if they know it's coming. The Vikings have also been horrific stopping intermediate to deep throws. Minnesota's been one of the worst teams defending running back passes as well. So even in the rematch, I just think this needs to be a game where Daniel Jones is throwing more again, more on early downs. Aside from that draw play that resulted in a touchdown, Saquon was pretty much bottled up on the ground, but he should be used as a pass catcher here because Minnesota's bottom 8 in the league in both receptions and yards to running backs. The Vikings defense is bottom 5 in the league situationally as well. Red zone, bottom 5. Third downs, bottom 5. You go back and look at that first game, Todd, and I know, just for full disclosure, we kind of originated that over at 47, and there were some differing opinions. It got to 48, saw a slight tick back down to 47.5, got sent back up to 48.5. There was even some 49. There was a couple 49.5s. Came back down and ultimately closed 48 as a consensus, a couple 48.5s in that market. And I know you'll look at the game and the box score and be like, oh, it took 28 points in the fourth quarter to go over that total. Both offenses were moving it early in that game. They just couldn't sustain some of the scoring drives. You get into plus territory, you'd settle for a field goal. You get into plus territory and you're ahead of the chains and you take a sack. So I'm interested from that perspective. But again, we saw this open 47.5, get sent to 48.5. We're back down to 48. The 24 was in the first half. That's been gobbled up. It kind of felt like, and I'll just be candid here, that people were trying to get out ahead of other bettors and not necessarily handicap this game. And so it doesn't surprise me, based upon what I think could unfold, that there was a little under money. Obviously, I don't think you really want to bet a Vikings game under in the full game just because of what it means, right? Like if they're behind, they're uber efficient playing catch up. If they're leading, their defense is horrific stopping the pass, so it allows teams to get back in it, and you just ultimately see scoring from both sides. So I think that's interesting, but the other side of the ball here, Todd, is where maybe some defensive adjustments show themselves.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. I mean, the Giants going to be a little bit healthier where it matters most in the defensive backfield in this particular spot. We'll see the status of Adoree Jackson, but Xavier McKinney did miss the first game. Obviously, those are the top 2 cover cornerbacks that this team has on their roster. Fabian Moreau is out there getting torched like a traffic cone, allowed 142 rating against him and 84 yards in coverage. You look at Dexter Lawrence, the contributions he can make. I thought Xavier McKinney's comments about Justin Jefferson were rather interesting. A full-blown bulletin board material about saying he puts on his clothes, we do the same thing. We've got really good defensive backs, and I'm not worried about it at all. Kirk Cousins, Payne, for all of his trials and tribulations, was very good against the Giants' league-leading blitz rate the first time around. Finished 14-21, passer rating north of 120. And when he wasn't blitzed, I mean, you're talking about a passer rating that was sub 100. Obviously, this is a Giants team, though, that should be able to generate more pressure, knowing that another thing that's changed from the first meeting is the Vikings' offensive line that had been a model of consistency most weeks, going to look significantly different in this spot than it did back in Week 16.
Yeah, I mean, that's bang on, and that's what will be a key factor here in that, the Giants' defense rested their guys last week. A couple guys were dealing with some injuries, but you're going to get much healthier. Azeez and Leonard Williams are going to play. McKinney back at safety. Williams, Adoree Jackson returned to practice leading up to Week 17. So he's gotten basically like 2.5 weeks of practice in. Is he going to be out there and play? But to your point, the Vikings offense looks a little bit different. You're down to your third string center. Your starting right tackle, Brian O'Neill, is out for this game. And so the Giants are not only trending better defensively, especially when you look at some of the offenses that they've played down the stretch, and when they've played lesser offenses, how they've performed, certainly trending in the right direction while also getting healthier, and the Vikings offensive line is trending poorly. The Giants do get pressure at the 4th highest rate in this league since Week 10. That's awesome, but they also have the highest blitz rate. And so that'll be the interesting factor here is it's tough to tell Wink what to do. Brian Daboll probably is wise to make some suggestions in terms of dialing back the blitz rate this week and enhancing the man rate. And so that'll be interesting to see. Obviously, Cousins is extremely sensitive to organic pressure. He is substantially worse against man coverage. If you look at that first meeting, Wink blitzed Kirk Cousins 26 times. The problem was he didn't play the best coverage behind it. So on those 26 blitzes, when the Giants elected to play man coverage behind it, Kirk Cousins was as bad gets, 25% success rate. So if Wink's going to blitz, you got to play man behind it. They actually blitzed and used zone more often, which was a bizarre take that will probably get itself figured out this week, you could hope. But when the Giants blitzed and used zone behind it, Cousins had a 71% success rate. The other thing that's interesting here, and it's not getting talked about a lot because Kirk Cousins is putting up some video game numbers and Justin Jefferson was vying for the all-time record, and you have decent name brands like Cook and Thielen, who I think probably are both trending down just a touch as players. But quietly since week 11, Minnesota's number 25 in schedule-adjusted efficiency. They have not been able to run the ball at all. Like, just have not been able to run a lick over that same time frame. 31st in EPA per rush, just 32% of runs have grade successful. I oddly think the vision of Minnesota's high-flying offense and the Giants' defense being a train wreck is kind of influencing some things here where if you dig into some of the underlying stuff and the Giants do things properly, it might not be the offensive explosion for Minnesota that you could potentially see on the surface here, Todd.
Hey, roll a little coverage to Jefferson, make Cousins beat you with some of his secondary options. I can't imagine TJ Hawkinson goes absolutely nuclear like we saw the first time around, but we know the Giants have struggled against tight ends. So I think to your point at the top, it's what makes these rematches, especially ones that have been played very recently, more a chess match. I mean, it's not like these are division rivals that play twice a year where they know the ins and the outs, but who can make those adjustments based on a field goal game that we saw just a few short weeks ago? Obviously, much more important stakes here, and it should be a very highly entertaining watch Sunday afternoon with two offenses that are more than capable when they start playing downhill. Now, speaking of capable offenses, I'm not quite sure we will see that on full display Sunday night, and we'll break this game down, and as always, well, I shouldn't say as always, but a little bit unusual scheduling. We do have the good Doc Deepak to correct anything that we may get wrong in our Lamar Jackson analysis in any capacity in this one. But Ravens-Bengals, Sunday Night Football, Payne. And when you look at this game now, we've obviously seen the market take off in favor of the Bengals. They opened as low as a 5.5, 6-point favorite. Number is ballooned out to 9, pretty much the consensus at this point. Totals come down as well into that 40.5 range. These teams split the season series. Obviously, Lamar didn't play game 2, and the Bengals played a semi-vanilla game plan when we saw them last weekend. First ever playoff meeting between these two teams. John Harbaugh, most road playoff wins by any head coach in NFL history. Meanwhile, the Bengals are seeking playoff wins in consecutive seasons for the first time in franchise history. You have to go all the way back to 1981-82 that they've accomplished that feat. When you look at the way the Ravens have performed, I mean, they've been outstanding as an underdog, and you can understand why with so much of their DNA predicated on playing defense. The Bengals, though, have been a juggernaut at the betting window, going 20-4 ATS over the last 24 games. That's tied for one of the best streaks in NFL history with 3 other teams, and Joe Burrow does nothing but cover numbers, compiling a 31-15 ATS record in his career, which includes the playoffs, best by any quarterback since the merger, a minimum of 40 starts. Rather than breaking down both sides of the ball, Payne, I feel like the number makes the most sense as a logical place to start because so much of this is impacted by who the Ravens will or won't have under center. We thought it was going to be Lamar, or at least the market did. Then they thought it was going to be Tyler Huntley. He's limited in practice, and now we're kind of in that no man's land where everyone's trying to figure out, do we get chapter 2 of the Anthony Brown experience, or is it Tyler Huntley in a limited compromise capacity?
So the line's interesting, and we talked about it a little off air, but we had effectively an opening of 6.5 here. And to me, that was a mixed line between a rusty Lamar Jackson that's not completely mobile with a less than 100% knee and Tyler Huntley. That was the mix. Once Lamar wasn't at practice Wednesday, we're now sitting anywhere between 8.5, 9, and this line to me is now a mix of a less than 100% Tyler Huntley or Anthony Brown. Huntley, through Wednesday in a limited fashion, he has a throwing shoulder and wrist injury that he's dealing with, so I think this can leak a little. If it gets to 10 and Tyler Huntley plays, I would fully expect a buy order on the Ravens to come in. If this stays in that 8.5, 9 range and it's not Tyler Huntley and it goes to 10.5, 11, I don't think there's going to be a willingness to back Anthony Brown. I just don't see that transpiring here. And I think, for Baltimore to have a chance, it has to be Tyler Huntley, who's healthier than expected, and we just don't know if that's the case. But I would think when you look at that situation, it could lend itself to at least some buyback. Any other way, I don't necessarily see it. And Tyler Huntley isn't the best quarterback in the world. Like, I think even bettors and people think that he is better than he actually is because he's a seamless system fit. He's, they view him as Lamar light effectively. But if you just look at the last 2 seasons combined, among quarterbacks with at least 200 snaps, Tyler Huntley is QB 41 out of 48 in EPA per play. And that incorporates his legs into those numbers. 43 quarterbacks have attempted 200 or more passes the last 2 seasons. Huntley is dead last in yards per pass attempt, dead last in passing touchdown rate. So you just look at even the ceiling for the Ravens offense with Tyler Huntley. There's just a massive cap. He throws so short to where he can go out and go 27 for 32 against Denver and somehow lead the offense to just 10 points, right? He hung 16 against Pittsburgh, 3 against Cleveland, 17 against a horrific Atlanta defense that can't stop the run, and 13 at home against Pittsburgh. That's the basic point output. Like, what's the path to points for Baltimore here? We know Lou Anarumo is great with halftime adjustments. Well, how about adjustments the third time through? Which is what he's going to see with this Ravens offense. I think there's really 2 ways Baltimore can keep this within the number, and both have to happen in the same game. And it's basically Baltimore's defensive line has to absolutely rule the day. Dominate up front, get pressure on Joe Burrow naturally. We know the Bengals starting right tackle La'el Collins tore his ACL in Week 16. Starting right guard Alex Kappa has a knee injury. He was seen on a scooter after last week's game. So the entire right side of the Bengals offensive line is out. T. Higgins, which you alerted me to last night, isn't dealing with just an illness. He has a hip pointer that could cause him to be less than 100%. So that's the path on the defensive side of the ball. The other thing that has to happen, Baltimore has to be able to run the ball efficiently. Dobbins has been great the last 4 games. Harbaugh saw that, sat Dobbins out last week to get him fully rested for this game. The Bengals, though, are 8th in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency since Week 12. They're 4th in EPA per rush allowed in that same time frame. But the vibe of this game for Baltimore is very much got to get pressure on Burrow. We're not going to be as aggressive with our coverage, right? We're going to play 2 high shell. We're going to make Burrow work it down the field 10, 12, 14 plays at a time. You saw that last week where it took, I believe, 17 plays on one drive for the Bengals to score. And the hope is that you'll be able to create a negative with the O-line issues, whether it's a pre-snap penalty that sets the Bengals behind the down and distance, whether it's a sack, right? Create a negative. And the Bengals really haven't been humming on offense recently, right? It was like the most lackluster 34 points ever scored in a game on Tampa. They struggled in the second half once Collins went down in New England. Last week, turnovers created a bunch of short fields and were virtually the enabler for every Bengals point. Offensively for Baltimore, you got to run it, right? Use play action, get Andrews unlikely involved. I don't know why they don't use those 2 more. I mean, if you look, almost 27% of the catches allowed by the Bengals defense this season have been to the tight end position. Drives that pick up a few first downs and end in a punt and change field position, that's a good win here, right? Give the defense some rest. Use that huge advantage that you have on special teams. That's really the exact formula and path for the Ravens to be able to stay within this number. Special teams has to be able to just show out here, have to be able to get the ground game going a little bit. You got to be able to pressure Burrow naturally. Those are the 3 ways to stay within this number now that it's at 9 and we're looking at some sharp shops going to 9.5.
When you look at the Ravens, this defense, and some of the numbers are pretty interesting. 14.7 points per game allowed since the Roquan Smith trade. It's the second best in the NFL span. They've allowed 7 touchdowns on 25 red zone drives for a 28% success rate. Best red zone defense in the NFL during that span. And you look at Roquan Smith, 15 red zone tackles, tied for most. But I guess the overarching question I actually have for you, Payne, we've talked about the linebacker position being devalued. Were you surprised that the Ravens made such a substantial financial commitment to Roquan Smith in season already rather than assessing what they had there in the offseason?
No. Once you give up the assets you gave up for him, you have to then re-sign him. I am surprised that an organization that is that analytically savvy chose to make the trade in the first place. Now, make no bones about it, he's improved the front seven because the linebacker core was a disaster. I won't get too far into it because I do think Lamar is sitting because he's not 100% healthy. I don't think he's just sandbagging here. But even in that situation where you could get that in your mind when you're going into free agency, you certainly aren't going to want a performance where you're less than 100% and don't show well as your last thought into free agency. It also really helps that the offense struggles without you. But I don't think that's happening here, but I can tell you Lamar's camp was not happy about seeing that contract for a linebacker making $100 million. I can tell you. I
can only begin to imagine the similarity between Roquan Smith and Lamar Jackson. They both represent themselves. Lord only knows what's going to go on in this Baltimore Ravens front office should their season come to a screeching halt on Sunday with a loss against a divisional rival. You talk about Lamar and what's been plaguing him. Payne and I can speculate, but there's a reason you bring in experts to try and provide that kind of a perspective. And the good doc Deepak has everything you need and then some. You can follow him on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis. He shares all the injuries you're going to want to watch for this wild card weekend.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
All right, thanks guys. So we have a ton of big names on this injury report, and none are bigger than Lamar Jackson. He's now missed 5 weeks of practice and games, and he started off this week by missing Wednesday's session as well. Now, originally we were hearing that Lamar was expecting to play, and he was telling people close to him that he was expecting to play this coming weekend. And that made sense because by the end of 6 weeks, over 80% of players would typically return from this type of injury. Now, while that data does suggest a good likelihood that he comes back, we're actually strongly leaning against that being the outcome here. Now, Lamar is reportedly still having swelling in the knee, and when you have a big injury, for example a PCL like he did, you try to treat it non-operatively by getting the swelling down and then getting the range of motion and strength of the knee back to normal. It's hard to get the strength of the knee back to normal when you have swelling in there, and the fact that it does have some swelling puts him at a little bit of a higher risk of injuring something further, like cartilage or meniscus, that could ultimately need surgery in the off season. So with Lamar especially coming up on a contract negotiation and an expiring deal, and reportedly looking for a fully guaranteed long-term deal, it's not going to be surprising if he's conservative here, and in fact that's probably what I would tell him to do if I were his treating physician. And then we have Jalen Hurts. Now, he did play, of course, last week. He didn't exactly put up Jalen Hurts type numbers, the MVP type numbers that we were looking for, but I think the injury does explain that, and the reason is you took away a lot of his running game, and that was to protect his shoulder in the short term. The way this gets injured is most likely a hit directly to the area or a fall directly on the area. Throwing may hurt, but it's not likely to necessarily re-injure his shoulder in this way. So when you add on 2 more weeks to his recovery, again, he was at 3 weeks and he will be at 5 by the time they start the playoffs. You'd expect this to be pretty significantly improved. I think Jalen Hurts is going to be looking a lot like the Jalen Hurts that we saw this offseason, or this season rather, and most likely the running game is something they're going to look to exploit again, as his shoulder 5 weeks out from this injury is not highly likely to have a re-injury. Then we have Deebo Samuel. Now, he of course was back in action in week 18. He did not really have the workload or the production that we are used to seeing from Deebo Samuel, but I don't think for Niners fans that should worry you. And the reason is that wide receivers coming off of this type of injury generally take at least one game to ramp up their volume. So the data favors him being full speed by the time the playoffs come around, and then you factor in the confounding potential variable that the Niners had this game pretty much under wraps and didn't really need to stress Deebo to win it. So overall, I'm looking for a full strength Deebo Samuel in the playoffs starting this coming weekend. And then we have Lane Johnson. Now, we'd lean towards Johnson being active when the playoff time comes around for the Eagles next week. Now that they've landed the bye, Johnson will have had 4 weeks to rehab, and it's obviously not a perfect solution. He has a torn tendon and it'll need to be repaired eventually with surgery, but you would think that at 4 weeks, most of the pain control would be able to be achieved, and he would therefore be able to play through, not necessarily as the all-pro tackle that we're used to seeing, but still as a pretty solid starter on an offensive line. And then we have Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins. Now, he reportedly had a hip pointer, and that's basically a big bruise or contusion to the area, the hip and groin area. But with the way that T. Higgins has responded so far, we are expecting him to play and not really have a tremendous performance impact at this point. Then we have Joey Bosa. Now, he had big surgery on both sides, and then he re-aggravated this injury last week. Now, they're saying Joey Bosa is probably going to play, and we do believe that, but for Joey Bosa's performance, we're not expecting the all-pro level player that we normally get. And if we get that player, it's likely only to be in spurts. At this point, it's not realistic to say that his endurance is going to be where it needs to be for him to play at his normal level. So I think next year you're looking at full strength to start week 1, but probably not this playoffs. And then his teammate, Mike Williams. Now, he was of course carted off with a back injury. He hasn't practiced so far in 2 days this week, and that doesn't really bode well for his availability, but they did say that Mike Williams had a structurally sound back, so no major structural damage was done, luckily, with this injury. Again, this is going to be a pain control issue, so with the severity of it being probably pretty high, I would expect Mike Williams to try to give it a go, but probably have some performance and or snap count limitations when he comes up this coming weekend. And then we have Dolphins Tua Tagovailoa. Now, he's of course had multiple concussions this year. It's been well documented, and even if they make it past this week, I really wouldn't expect Tua to take the field for the rest of this playoffs. Now, there's not a lot of data to go off of here, and really what we're looking at is the fact that the Tua is having symptoms this far out from a repeat concussion, and that just overall doesn't bode well for short-term availability. And then we have Kenneth Walker. Now, he did miss practice this week, but he looks to be a go for the coming weekend. We will certainly update that as the game approaches, but at this point, Kenneth Walker is most likely not dealing with a setback from the lingering ankle injury that he suffered earlier this year. It's more likely just a planned day of rest, and that's very typical, especially of low ankle injuries. Again, Kenneth Walker, he has had some performance ups and downs recently, but overall played pretty well and gotten big workloads. I expect him to play again, not really be affected by the injury, but you may see him rest here and there the rest of the week. And then one shout out to Damar Hamlin. Best wishes. So thankful for his recovery. Really, obviously scary incident that happened. All we want to say about Damar Hamlin is that we are rooting for and believe that he can play again in the NFL, and that it may be next year. So we'll see what happens, but overall we all have Damar Hamlin in our thoughts. And that's all I got for now, so we'll turn it back to you.
Like we said, you can follow Deepak on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis. You can follow Payne there as well at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. And most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. An extensive breakdown, as always, from Deepak. He's been a great addition to the Bet the Board family. And like we said, Payne, no reason for you and I to talk about Lamar Jackson's injury and what it means. You lean on the experts to do that for you.
No doubt about it. Yeah, so. I think you're spot on. Now, we're getting to some at least one quarterback that's not quite as mobile as Lamar Jackson.
How dare you? How dare you cast aspersions at a man that single-handedly is propping up the NFC playoff picture quarterback pedigree, that, of course, being the ageless wonder in Tom Brady, who finds himself installed as a home underdog in primetime on Monday night as they'll welcome in America's team. It's the Dallas Cowboys, a 2.5-point road favorite, total in the game 45.5. This number has come down off the key number of 3. Totals remain largely unchanged, although there were some 44.5s out there if you shopped around originally. Tom Brady and the Cowboys both have 35 playoff wins in their illustrious careers, or in the case of one, an entire franchise. The interesting caveat to that, Payne, Dallas has exactly 3 playoff wins since Tom Brady entered the league 20-plus years ago. When you look at Tom Brady's 35 career playoff wins compared to the rest of the NFC, that group has 2. 7-0 in his career versus the Cowboys, his most wins without a loss versus any team, best record by any quarterback all time versus the Cowboys. And as far as the Cowboys and their playoff futility, an 8-game road playoff losing streak is tied for the second longest in playoff history behind the Lions' 11 straight. Last win for the Cowboys on the road, 1992 NFC Championship game at the 49ers. 7 postseason one-and-done since 1996, tied for the second most during the span behind the Colts' 10. Tom Brady as a playoff underdog, well, he's been money at the betting window, 7-3 ATS, tied for the most wins in the NFL since 2000 with Eli Manning. This will actually be his first career playoff start as a home underdog. Payne, the lasting image that we saw of the Dallas Cowboys Week 18 was something best described as a lifeless effort against the Washington Commanders. Dak Prescott, a robust 14 of 37, and for a quarterback that you thought could build some confidence coming into the postseason, he probably regressed a little bit, plagued by the turnover bug yet again. When you try and assess the Cowboys' offense and their path to success against the Buccaneers' defense, that's a far cry from some of the previous editions. Does Dallas have any matchup advantages they can exploit either with their backfield or leaning on their alpha receiver in CeeDee Lamb?
Possibly, but I think there's a lot of metrics that depict Dak as having a really good season. He's 8th in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation, but I think there's 2 key things here that are trending in opposite directions. You look at who Dak's played defensively since returning in Week 7. These are the defenses that Dak has played in schedule-adjusted efficiency. Number 28, Detroit. Number 32, Chicago. Number 20, Green Bay. Number 29, Giants. Number 14, Indianapolis with a slew of injuries. Number 22, Houston. Number 26, Jacksonville. Number 19, Titans, who rested all their best defensive players, creating that bye on that Thursday game. And number 13, Washington last week, who had 5 defensive starters out. The best competition, the Eagles, who played gobs of zone coverage. And that's not how you want to defend Dak and the Cowboys, who struggled to create separation with their receivers in the routes in which those receivers run. It's why Dallas was looking to add a receiver, and they went with T.Y. Hilton. That's the last thing you want to give Dak is passing windows in zone. For the Buccaneers, you kind of hinted at them not playing to past levels, and while I agree, I do think their defense is probably being devalued in the market right now because it appears on the surface as just being an above-average defense that's 13th in schedule-adjusted efficiency. But they've dealt with so many injuries, and it looks like they're going to be healthier, especially in the secondary. Jamel Dean, Carlton Davis, Antoine Winfield Jr., Murphy Bunting were all going to be available for the Buccaneers here. That's going to be the 3rd time since Week 5 that all 4 have been healthy enough to play at the same time. And if that's the case, the Buccaneers defense can play to a unit that's more in that 6 to 9 range. And that's where you're seeing some of the value that I think Pro Bettor saw and why they wiped out all the 3 in this market. The only spot where the Buccaneers have proven to be vulnerable, to your point about a specific matchup, is defending the slot. I think that can change a little bit with the aforementioned health there. So the Cowboys passing game is very much CeeDee Lamb or bust right now. And the Bucs are bottom 5 defending slot receivers. It's truly the one area where you can exploit them, and that's where CeeDee Lamb lines up a bunch. But the Buccaneers also play gobs of man coverage, and Dak is substantially worse against man. So I think it's impossible, right, to hold Dallas the way Tampa did back in week 1. And after last week's lackluster performance, which you mentioned against Washington and being called out all week, you'd expect a more focused Dallas team with an extra day. But the formula is here. The Buccaneers have a plus defense when they're healthy. The Cowboys haven't faced many good defenses that were healthy. Man coverage. And in the first matchup, Dak was QB 33 out of 33 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation with that formula of the better version of the Bucs defense that plays man coverage. You also have to keep your eye on the Cowboys starting center, Tyler Bayadesh, who is dealing with an ankle injury. Missed last week. That caused the Cowboys to move the entire left side of their offensive line around. They're hopeful he can play. I do expect Dallas to show better offensively than in the first matchup and in last week, but it's not this picture-perfect Dallas offense that everybody envisions it because Dak is not playing overly well right now. He's feeling the pressure. We saw that last week a little bit, and they just have not played a schedule of good defenses at all since Dak returned. So this is a step up in class as well.
Yeah,
Todd.
and some of their running metrics have actually fallen off as well. You mentioned the injury at center. Some of the film gurus out there saying it looked like Dak wasn't nearly as confident with some of his protections there in terms of getting happy feet in the pocket. The other injury that the Cowboys have suffered along the offensive line happened a few weeks ago, and the ground game hasn't been nearly as dynamic since they lost Terrence Steele. So we talk about offensive linemen for the most part as being interchangeable pieces, but for those folks that pull in one way, shape, or form like a cohesive unit, you break up any of that chemistry there, it can be a real problem even against the Bucs defense. To your point, should be better here despite underperforming given some health concerns throughout the course of the regular season. Now, obviously, the headliner in this game, and like we said in the NFC, is going to be Tom Brady. You look at this Bucs offense, it has been anything but an elite unit that's displayed consistency week in, week out. I mean, this is a team 21st in third down conversion percentage, 22nd in the red zone, where they were 4th and 5th respectively over the previous 2 years. They've also struggled to run the football, averaging an NFL low 76.4 yards per game. It's the second worst among playoff teams ever since 1970. The one thing that Tom Brady's had to deal with is a jumbled up offensive line that hasn't exactly given him the best protection. Thankfully for him and his veteran savvy, he still gets the ball away at one of the fastest rates in the NFL. Brady, meanwhile, though, can obviously erase an uninspired regular season performance. From a collective with postseason heroics here, this would be his first with a losing record as a starter and the first time his team has scored under 20 points per game. Payne, the Cowboys defense, Micah Parsons has really fallen off. We know there's a number of guys capable of getting pressure. You look at how many guys have compiled multiple sacks, but there's questions, sometimes more so than answers, for what the Cowboys are going to bring defensively against the Tampa offense that has playmakers. Maybe Mike Evans started to build confidence against a second and third string defensive back for the Carolina Panthers. But if you're looking at Tampa and identifying a path for them to have success against Dan Quinn's defense, is it establishing the ground game or is it sticking with what works, letting Tom Brady throw it 45 to 50 times?
There is a path for the Buccaneers to win comfortably here. There's a path for the Buccaneers to make a run in the playoffs. And it's three simple things. You got to run more no-huddle offense, where the Buccaneers surge to being a top 10 unit in EPA per play. It's using more play action, which for some reason only happens 16% of the time for Tampa, the second lowest rate in the league. And it's not being predictable on first down. Because if you look at first down this season, Tampa is a top 10 offense in EPA per play when passing, dead last 32nd in EPA per rush on first down. All of the things that we've been bitching about for over a year now, and it's finally caught on with other content creators and mainstream media. But I think we're starting to figure out why there's this massive disconnect, and the hope is that there's been some internal conversations to help the disconnect and change some things for this playoff run. The coaching staff doesn't know they're doing it wrong, as crazy as that's going to sound to some, because they look up and see Tom Brady setting records for all-time pass attempts and completions in a season, and they think they're passing it a ton. This, to me, is a very easy fix. The Buccaneers are just passing on the wrong downs. Like, Leftwich thinks they are throwing it a ton, and they are, and Bowles is having a heart attack on the sideline every time Brady drops back to pass as this defensive-minded coach. And so Byron and Bowles know how pass-heavy the offense is on second and third down, that they believe the only time we can sneak a run in there is on first down. And all that's doing is leading to being wildly predictable on first down. You can't do that against Dallas. Dallas is actually 6th defensively in first down rush efficiency. Since week 13, they're number 1 in EPA per rush allowed. And all that's going to do is force Brady and the offense into being predictable on second and third and long, where the Cowboys pass rush can kind of get after Tom a little bit. But to your point, the pass rush has subsided as Parsons' play has dwindled a little bit. But if you look, that is the key here, because since week 10, Tom Brady's 30th in EPA per pass when pressured. So that is the key here. If the Bucs are going to be stupid and run on first down, and it's going to be second and long, third and long, suddenly that Cowboys pass rush can get after Brady a little bit. If the Buccaneers pass more on early downs, it will set up better run situations. That should be the goal here. Pass on early downs, take advantage of a Cowboys secondary that's downtrending, then run in neutral situations. But if you look since week 13, and to your point, this is the way you want to attack Dallas right now, especially on early downs. The Cowboys pass defense, 25th in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency, 25th in passing success rate allowed since week 13. I mean, we're not talking about elite quarterbacks over this stretch either that are giving Dallas trouble. They've played one starting quarterback, one full-time starting quarterback since week 13. Davis Mills, who was benched at one point and shared snaps down the stretch, Matt Ryan, Gardner Minshew, Josh Dobbs, and a rookie in Sam Howell. Those are the quarterbacks that are eating this secondary up. And so if the Buccaneers do this thing the right way, they're going to have some success on offense. The Buccaneers' offensive line, a little bit healthier at the tackle positions as well. Let's keep an eye up the middle. Robert Hainsey left the Falcons game with a hamstring injury. Ryan Jensen is still working off to the side. He has about 7 or 8 days to get put on the active roster before he has to hit the IR again. So let's see if he's potentially available here. You don't want to be on your third-string starting center, but we'll see how that shakes out from now until Monday, so something to keep your eye on. But there is a path here, Todd, for some offensive success for the Buccaneers, especially if they do it the right way, and there's some potential chatter and some stuff that's been sent their way that they might be able to execute in the right manner here. I wouldn't hold my breath, but there's a possibility.
Hey, one last thing on that game. Were you surprised to see that game move off the 3 as quickly as it did early in the week before limits had been raised at most of the more prominent sports books?
No.
Fair enough. It's short, concise, and right to the point when you talk about key numbers and their level of importance when you try and factor that into the equation and the calculus of handicapping playoff games where every point comes at a premium. You can follow Payne again on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, we covered an awful lot of ground. 6 games. It is a monumental undertaking this time of year. It's a labor of love to try and be able to uncover all of the elements, albeit we'll call it 5+ with the short rant from us on the Bills-Dolphins game and what that game could have been versus what it actually is when it'll get played on Sunday. Last but not least, it is the best bet portion of the program. What have you identified throughout these 6 matchups that you find to be the most actionable?
Hopefully we get a little better variance running our way, but there's 2 things that I like. We've obviously broke these games down ad nauseum. We've run extremely long, so if you want a large synopsis of why we like both of these, go to the timestamp of the game. The first one that we'll use is the Buffalo Bills first half -7, still widely available. I would cut that off at -20 in terms of VIG. So the first one is Buffalo Bills first half -7. The second one, now that this has come back in range for us and the weather doesn't look as bad as it once did, let's go with a 7-point 2-team teaser. We'll grade it at -140. We'll use the 49ers down to 2.5, and we'll pair it with the Buccaneers on Monday night, getting them up to 9.5 on a 2-team 7-point teaser. So 2 best bets this week. Buffalo first half -7, and then the 2-team teaser, 49ers to Buccaneers, getting the 49ers below that key of 3. and the Buccaneers above the 3 and the 7 out to 9.5.
Look at that. 2 for the price of 1, building on the momentum of a rocking chair national championship best bet winner with the Georgia Bulldogs first half and full game. Anything else that you would like to share with our loyal listeners to try and impart some final nuggets before we reconvene next Thursday at the same time with, I think it's 4. I can't even count anymore. 4 divisional matchups.
No, I think we're good. This is the undertaking in the playoffs because you have 6 games. They're all rematches this week, so you're digging into the nooks and the crannies. I think we covered a ton of ground, divulged some information that you won't hear anywhere else, and hopefully we get 2 home this week.
And the nice part about it is people can break it up. They can listen to Saturday's games in anticipation of Saturday. Then they can break it up for Sunday and, of course, Monday night with the games spread out nicely across the primetime schedule. Again, thanks to all of you, our loyal listeners. If you're tuning in to Bet the Board for the first time all season, this is the kind of comprehensive content that you can come to expect, not just from the NFL side, but all of the podcasts that work under our umbrella. And if you haven't already done so, I encourage you guys to download, listen, and pay attention to Cardboard Chat. Episode 10 dropped earlier this week. Payne does an outstanding job with minority owner Jesse Craig of PWCC talking about the sports trading card marketplace, some of the things that you can look for, whether you're a veteran investor there or just looking to try and diversify your portfolio. There's no guys who do it better than that tandem. Encourage you guys to check that out. Worst case, get to it in the offseason when you got a little bit more free time at your disposal. Again, best of luck with all of your wildcard weekend best bets, endeavors, and everything else that you have on the slate. Meanwhile, with a tandem of tickets in hand as far as best bets are concerned, hopefully we'll see you at the window come Sunday after, or I guess Monday night as the case may be, with the final leg of that Bucs Cowboys teaser.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.